Hey, so this is the first little intro that we do at the start of the class, just to give you a little bit of overview of clays, their properties, glazing, that sort of thing. So when we're doing our course, our 4-week course, we'll basically start the first class, of the course is about centering. So making sure that the clay's in the middle of the wheel, and there's a real skill to that. And so once you've got the clay in the middle of the wheel, then you can create something that's symmetrical. If it's not in the center of the wheel and you start to try and pull up on the clay, then it'll go out of balance and you'll just fall apart. So the first class is centering. We may talk about pulling up and you may make a piece. The second class is making, so we're just going to go over the skills that we've learned in the first class, so centering and pulling up. If we haven't gone through pulling up, then we'll do it in the second class. Don't stress if it takes you a while to get centering. It can be a little tricky to start with, and some people get a little bit frustrated with it, but you'll get there, okay? The second class, as I said, is practicing and pulling up. The third class will be trimming, and that's where you make the piece more of the shape that you want it to be. So for example, this piece here, which is a student's piece, potentially was straight up and down, and she's trimmed all these pieces off here to make it a different shape. So that's where we pull off the excess clay and make it a little bit more symmetrical and a little bit rounded. Then the fourth class will be glazing. So in between the second and the third classes, I will bisque fire, and I'll talk about that in a second. I will fire your work, we'll come back, and then you'll glaze at the fourth class, and then you'll come back after the 4 classes and pick up your work. So then we'll go, I'll just give you a little overview of clay and how it works. So when you make something, the first thing is that once it's made, it's very malleable. So you want to leave it, and you leave it for a day to 2. It depends on the weather. In this class, because we leave it a week, we'll cover it up. If you cover anything in plastic a couple of times, it will stop drying out anymore. So once you've made a piece, it dries a day to 2 if it was uncovered. Then you trim it. So that's where you clean it up and create any features in your piece. So that could be this little thing here. It could be carving on your piece like this. It could be creating a little base like that, and the pieces on the side, the carving into it. So that's the trimming. Now, when your piece is trimmed, then we'll dry it out completely. Now, when it's dried out completely, it's very, very brittle. So this piece here has been dried out, and this is before it's been fired. It's really, really brittle. So when you're picking up your work that's still what's called greenware, so it hasn't been fired, but it's 100% dry, be really careful how you pick it up. Don't pick it up the sides like this. Just pick it up and make sure that you're holding it. And for that reason, we don't touch any other people's work. Just make sure that you're handling your own work. So then once your piece is fully dry, so this piece here is fully dried, then it will go into the kiln for a bisque fire. Now, a bisque fire is at 1,000 degrees, and when you put things in the kiln to fire, it needs to be 100% dry. If there's any moisture left in your piece, it can explode and crack and cause issues. So it needs to be 100% dry before we fire it. Firing itself can take about 12 hours, and then it can take about 12 hours to cool down. So that's a 2-day process. So once your work is completely dried, then it will go into a bisque fire. then once it's out of a bisque fire, it's more stable. So your piece, you can hold it and it won't break. And that's why we bisque fire before we glaze, because glazing, we handle our work a fair bit. So we want to make sure that it's stable enough that if we're doing anything with our pieces or handling it, that it will hold the shape and not break. Then once it's bisque fired, we'll glaze it, and then it will go in for a glaze firing. And the glaze firing will depend on what clay you use. Now, in our class, we use stoneware, but I'll talk about the other clays now. So basically, there's different firing temperatures of different clay. Now, this will be reversed because my camera is reversed, but you get the point. So this one here is called earthenware. A lot of people use it for hand building because it you don't have to fire it as high, and it's still porous. So like terracotta clay, that's still porous. You know, if your terracotta pots with your plants, if you're watering it, you'll notice that it draws in moisture. That's not food safe if it draws in moisture. So the earthenware, when you look at a thing of clay, and again, this will be reversed, but you'll be able to see what I mean. It'll tell you the bisque firing, which is 1,000, which is the same for no matter what clay you're using. Then it tells you your glaze temperature. Now this one here is 1,080 to 1,100. What you then have is a mid-fire. So this one's here is a mid-fire. The bisque temperature here is the same, 1,000. Okay, then it has a glaze temperature, which is 1220 degrees on this particular one. Now this clay here also tells you the cone. Now cone is like a universal temperature, so that it doesn't matter if you're talking Celsius or centigrade. The cone 6 relates to, there's a centigrade temperature and a Fahrenheit temperature. Then what we're using, okay, this one's covered up a little bit, but it's called stoneware. I'll just get another block, hold on. Okay, so this one here is stoneware. That's what I use. It's the most stable clay and it's the strongest. Well, other than porcelain. So porcelain's your next firing temperature. So if you look here, it'll tell you your bisque and your glaze. Again, bisque is 1,000, glaze on this one's 1250 to 1,300 degrees. Now, the reason that you need to know what temperature your clay is because an earthenware, a low fire or even a mid fire, if it's fired too high, it will actually melt and it will go onto the shells, it will go onto other work, and it will stick and cause thousands of dollars of damage to a kiln. So for that reason, if you're going to continue making, I will take only clay that's bought from me, so that I know what temperature clay it's to fire at, because then I actually take it off to somebody else at the moment that does my glaze firing or your glaze firing, which is I offer as a service for everybody who goes through my courses. The other thing is that your glaze, which is the colour that you put over the top, so this is your glaze, it will have different melting temperatures. So you need to choose the glaze specific to the clay that you're using. So an earthenware will have an earthenware glaze, mid-fire will have a mid-fire, high fire will have a high fire glaze. And you need to use that with the specific clay, with the specific temperature. Now different glazes, or the glaze will be different depending on which temperature it's fired to. So that affects the colour and the texture of your glaze. And we'll go into glazing in our 4th session. But basically that's our overview. And that's the first part of our course, which goes before getting your clay prepped up. Now, if you have done one of my courses, the next step for you, if you would like to come and do some drop-in, I've got that Pottery Antiques page, which you will be on now if you've gotten this video. So that Pottery Antiques page, then you'll have the ability, if you've done one of my courses, to use the studio and use my glazes and that sort of stuff. Oh, that's one of the things in this course, is that you'll get to use my glazes. So the glazes that I make up are the glazes that you can use. Because other courses I know won't let you use their studio glazes. So these are my studio glazes, and you can use those. These ones here. So they're the ones that I make up myself. And these colours here, not the orange, but the other colours. Okay. So basically, that's the end of the intro. And we'll talk to you soon. Bye.